Chapter 1. The Confession That Changed Everything. Rosalie Chen had exactly 3 minutes to figure out how to fake being sophisticated, worldly, and absolutely not the 24-year-old virgin librarian she actually was. Miss Chen? The elevator's smooth voice announced they'd reached the penthouse level of Sterling Tower, and Rosalie's stomach dropped somewhere around the 40th floor. Through the polished steel doors lay her interview with Kieran Sterling, tech billionaire, notorious recluse, and according to Forbes, the most eligible bachelor who'd never been photographed with the same woman twice. She clutched her portfolio tighter, the leather worn smooth from her grandmother's decades of use. Everything about this moment felt surreal. 2 weeks ago, she'd been cataloging rare manuscripts in the basement of Columbia's library. Now, she was interviewing to be the private curator for one of the world's most extensive collections of illuminated texts. The doors slid open to reveal not an office, but something resembling a modern-day monastery. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Manhattan, while temperature-controlled glass cases lined the walls, each containing manuscripts that made her heart race with academic excitement. The space was silent except for the soft hum of climate control systems protecting priceless artifacts. "You're early." The voice came from behind a towering bookshelf, rich and commanding with just a hint of an accent she couldn't place. Rosalie turned as Kieran Sterling emerged from the shadows like some mythical creature stepping out of legend. Every photo she'd seen had failed to capture the raw intensity of his presence. Tall and lean, with dark hair that looked like he'd been running his hands through it and steel-gray eyes that seemed to see straight through her carefully practiced professional demeanor. He wore a simple black sweater and dark jeans, but something about the way he moved screamed power and control. "Mr. Sterling." She extended her hand, proud that it barely trembled. "Thank you for this opportunity." His handshake was firm, brief, and sent an unexpected jolt of electricity up her arm. She'd read about chemistry in countless romance novels, but had never experienced it herself. This felt like touching a live wire. "Your credentials are impressive," he said, moving to a display case containing what looked like a 13th century book of hours. "But I don't hire based on degrees alone. These manuscripts have survived centuries. They've outlasted wars, revolutions, and the rise and fall of empires. I need someone who understands that we're not just preserving paper and ink. We're guarding humanity's soul." Rosalie's nervousness evaporated, replaced by genuine passion. "That's exactly why I became a manuscript specialist. In graduate school, I spent 2 years restoring a damaged psalter. Every time I repaired a torn page or stabilized fading ink, I felt like I was reaching across time to touch the monk who originally penned those prayers. These aren't just books. They're bridges between past and present." Something shifted in Sterling's expression. The calculating businessman facade cracked, revealing something raw and hungry underneath. "Show me." For the next hour, they moved through his collection like dancers in perfect synchronization. Rosalie forgot about her nerves, forgot about his wealth and reputation, forgot about everything except the breathtaking beauty of illuminated manuscripts that most people would never see. Sterling's questions were probing, intelligent, revealing a depth of knowledge that surprised her. "The Lindisfarne Gospels," she breathed, stopping before a case that made her knees weak. "I wrote my thesis on insular script, may I?" Sterling nodded, entering a code that released the case's magnetic locks. As Rosalie leaned closer to examine the intricate knotwork borders, she became acutely aware of Sterling's presence beside her. Heat radiated from his body, and she caught the scent of his cologne, something expensive and masculine, that made her think of thunderstorms and dark forests, the way the scribe intertwined. "Christian and Celtic motifs," she murmured, losing herself in the artwork. "It's like watching two cultures fall in love on the page." "Is that what you see when you look at medieval art? Love stories?" His voice had dropped to barely above a whisper, and when Rosalie looked up, she found his face inches from hers. Those steel-gray eyes had darkened to the color of storm clouds, and for a moment, the air between them seemed to crackle with electricity. "I see passion," she whispered back. "Whether it's religious devotion or romantic love, the greatest art comes from people who felt something so deeply they had to create beauty to contain it." Sterling's gaze dropped to her lips, and Rosalie's breath caught. Was this really happening? Was Kieran Sterling, the man who reportedly viewed relationships like business mergers, calculated, temporary, and strictly professional, looking at her like he wanted to devour her. "Mr. Sterling," she breathed, her voice barely audible. "Kieran," he corrected, his hand rising to cup her cheek. "Say my name." Kieran. The name felt foreign and thrilling on her tongue. He leaned closer, and Rosalie's eyes fluttered shut. This was it, her first kiss, and it was going to be with a billionaire in a room full of priceless manuscripts. The irony wasn't lost on her that she'd spent years reading about grand romantic gestures, and now she was living one. But as his lips nearly touched hers, panic seized her throat. "Wait," she gasped, pulling back so quickly she nearly knocked over a display. I shouldn't. I've never." Sterling's hands dropped to his sides, his expression shifting from desire to confusion to something that looked almost like concern. "Never what?" Heat flooded Rosalie's cheeks. She could lie. She could make up some excuse about professional boundaries or workplace ethics. Instead, the truth tumbled out of her mouth like a confession. "I've never been kissed." The silence that followed was deafening. Sterling stared at her as if she'd just announced she was from Mars. Then something extraordinary happened. All the careful control she'd witnessed, all the calculated restraint that made him a legendary businessman, simply shattered. His eyes blazed with an intensity that made her take an involuntary step backward. When he spoke, his voice was rough, almost reverent. "Never?" Rosalie shook her head, mortified by her admission but unable to take it back. "I know it's pathetic. A 24-year-old woman who's never—" "It's not pathetic." Sterling's voice cut through her self-recrimination like a blade. He ran both hands through his hair, turned away from her, then spun back around with the intensity of a man at war with himself. "Do you have any idea what you've just done to me?" Before she could answer, before she could process the hunger in his eyes, or the way her confession had clearly demolished every wall he'd built around himself, Sterling's phone buzzed against the glass case beside them. The spell broke. Reality crashed back in. Sterling glanced at the phone, and his expression shifted from raw desire to something that looked almost like panic. "I have to take this," he said, but his eyes never left her face. "Don't move. Don't go anywhere. We're not finished here." As he stepped away to answer the call, Rosalie caught her reflection in the glass case. Her lips were parted, her cheeks flushed, her eyes bright with something she'd never seen before. Awakening. She'd come here for a job interview. Instead, she'd just confessed her deepest secret to a man who looked at her like she was the rarest manuscript in his collection. And judging by the way Kieran Sterling kept glancing at her over his phone, like a man memorizing something precious he might lose, her confession had changed everything. Chapter 2. Rules were made to be broken. Kieran Sterling had 3 unbreakable rules when it came to women. Rule 1. Never get involved with employees. Rule 2. Never date anyone who could genuinely affect his business empire. Rule 3. Never, under any circumstances, get emotionally invested. As he watched Marcus Blackwood drone on about quarterly projections through his phone screen, all Kieran could think about was how spectacularly he wanted to shatter every single one of those rules. The Tokyo merger is contingent on— "Kieran, are you listening?" "Reschedule," Kieran said abruptly, ending the call before Marcus could protest. He turned back to find Rosalie examining a 14th century book of hours, completely absorbed in the intricate marginalia, as if nothing had happened between them. But something had happened. Something that made his chest tight and his hands shake, hands that had never trembled, not even when he'd bet his entire company on a single algorithm at age 26. "I've never been kissed." 4 words that had detonated in his brain like a bomb, destroying 15 years of careful emotional architecture. He'd built his fortune on reading people, on understanding their motivations and weaknesses. But Rosalie Chen had just confessed the one thing that made her utterly incomprehensible to him. In his world, innocence was currency, something people hoarded, spent, or faked for advantage. The idea that someone could reach 24 without ever being kissed, without playing the games he'd mastered, seemed impossible and absolutely intoxicating. "Tell me about this one," she said softly. gesturing to the manuscript she'd been studying. Her voice held a slight tremor, and he realized she was as affected by their interrupted moment as he was. Kieran moved to stand beside her, close enough to catch that subtle scent of vanilla and old books that seemed to define her. It's called the Prayer Book of Claude de France. 16th century. Notice how the artist used gold leaf to highlight the Virgin's halo. It was meant to catch candlelight during evening prayers. It's breathtaking. Rosalie leaned closer to the glass, and a strand of her dark hair fell across her cheek. The way the blues and golds complement each other, it's like the artist was painting music. Without thinking, Kieran reached out and tucked that wayward strand behind her ear. The simple contact sent electricity racing through his entire nervous system. Rosalie's breath caught, and she turned to look at him. Those warm brown eyes held a mixture of curiosity and nervousness that made him feel like a predator stalking something precious and fragile. Mr. Sterling. Kieran, he corrected again, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw before he could stop himself. And you haven't answered my question. What question? How is it possible that no one has ever kissed you? A flush painted her cheeks the color of roses. I spent most of high school in advanced classes with kids 2 years younger than me. College was graduate-level coursework and research. Graduate school was more of the same. I suppose I never met anyone who made me want to be kissed. The admission came out as barely a whisper. Kieran felt something fundamental shift inside his chest, like tectonic plates moving after centuries of stillness. And now? The question hung between them, charged with possibility and danger. Rosalie's gaze dropped to his mouth, and Kieran felt his legendary control slip another notch. Now I think I understand why medieval scribes wrote so much about desire, she whispered. It really does feel like fire. That was it. The last thread of his restraint snapped. Kieran cupped her face in both hands, tilting her chin up until their eyes met. Rosalie, he said, her name a prayer and a warning. If I kiss you right now, everything changes. My rules, your interview, this whole careful distance I maintain between business and pleasure, it all goes out the window. What if I want it to change? Her words hit him like lightning. This shy, brilliant woman who blushed when he touched her cheek was offering to demolish his entire world with 4 simple words. You don't know what you're asking for, he said roughly. I'm not a gentleman, Rosalie. I take what I want and I keep what's mine. If I kiss you, if I make you mine, I won't let you go easily. Instead of backing away, she stepped closer. Then don't let me go. Kieran's control shattered completely. He kissed her with 15 years of suppressed hunger, pouring everything he couldn't say into the press of his lips against hers. She tasted like innocence and possibility, like every good thing he'd denied himself in pursuit of power and success. Rosalie made a soft sound of surprise, her hands fisting in his sweater as she kissed him back with artless enthusiasm. She was unpracticed but eager, learning the rhythm of his mouth with an intensity that made his knees weak. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Kieran rested his forehead against hers. That was... Rosalie's voice was dreamy, dazed. Your first kiss, he finished, something primitive and possessive roaring to life in his chest. He would be her first everything if she let him. It was perfect, she breathed. Before Kieran could respond, the elevator chimed, and familiar voices drifted across the penthouse. His assistant Vivian's laugh, followed by Marcus Blackwood's answering chuckle. Shit, Kieran muttered, stepping back from Rosalie just as Vivian rounded the corner. Oh, the elegant blonde stopped short, taking in Kieran's rumpled hair and Rosalie's flushed cheeks with sharp intelligence. I'm sorry. I thought you were finished with interviews. We were just concluding, Kieran said smoothly, but his eyes never left Rosalie's face. Miss Chen, I believe we have everything we need to make a decision. Rosalie blinked, clearly struggling to transition from kissed senseless back to professional candidate. Of course. Thank you for your time, Mr. Sterling. The formal address stung, but Kieran understood. They had an audience now, and Rosalie was protecting herself the only way she knew how. Vivian will show you out, he said, then made a decision that would have terrified him an hour ago. Expect a call from HR tomorrow. As Rosalie gathered her portfolio and followed Vivian toward the elevator, she glanced back once. The look in her eyes, hope, confusion, and lingering desire, nearly made him cross the room and kiss her again. Witnesses be damned. The elevator doors closed, and Marcus appeared at his side with a knowing smirk. "Well, that was interesting," his business partner said. "I've never seen you look at a potential employee like you wanted to eat her alive." Kieran turned to face his oldest friend, the man who'd helped him build Sterling Industries from a dorm room idea into a tech empire. "She's not just any employee. No kidding. So what are you going to do about it?" Kieran looked back at the case containing the prayer book of Claude de France, remembering the wonder in Rosalie's eyes as she studied the illuminated pages. She saw beauty where others saw dollar signs, passion where others saw business opportunities. She was everything his carefully controlled world wasn't, and he was going to make her his. "Rules be damned. I'm going to break every rule I've ever made," he said quietly. "And I'm going to enjoy every second." Chapter 3. The offer she couldn't refuse. Rosalie's phone rang at exactly 9 a.m. the next morning, jarring her from dreams filled with storm-gray eyes and the taste of forbidden kisses. "Miss Chen? This is Helena Rodriguez from Sterling Industries HR. Mr. Sterling would like to schedule a follow-up meeting regarding your curator position." Rosalie nearly dropped her coffee mug. "A follow-up?" "Yes. Are you available this afternoon at 2? "Of course." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Should I bring anything additional?" "Just yourself." "Oh, and Miss Chen? Mr. Sterling asked me to mention that this meeting will be comprehensive. Plan to stay through the evening." The line went dead, leaving Rosalie staring at her phone in confusion and growing excitement. What did comprehensive mean? And why did the thought of spending an entire evening with Kieran Sterling make her stomach flutter with anticipation rather than nerves? By 1:45 p.m., she stood outside Sterling Tower again, this time wearing her best dress. A simple navy blue sheath that her roommate Zoe had insisted brought out her eyes. She'd spent 20 minutes on her makeup, something she never bothered with for library work, and pulled her hair into a professional chignon that kept coming loose no matter how many pins she used. The elevator ride to the penthouse felt both eternal and far too short. When the doors opened, she found not the scholarly sanctuary from yesterday, but something entirely different. Soft classical music played from hidden speakers. The harsh museum lighting had been replaced with warm, golden illumination that made the manuscript cases glow like jeweled shrines. And there, silhouetted against the wall of windows overlooking Manhattan, stood Kieran Sterling. He'd traded yesterday's casual sweater for a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that emphasized every lean line of his body. When he turned to face her, Rosalie's breath caught. Something had changed in his expression overnight. The careful businessman's mask was gone, replaced by focused intensity that made her feel like the only thing in his universe. Rosalie. Her name on his lips sounded like a caress. "Thank you for coming. Thank you for... Well, I'm not entirely sure what I'm thanking you for yet." She stepped into the space, hyper-aware of how her heels clicked against the polished floor. "Your HR representative mentioned this was about the curator position?" Kieran's mouth curved in something that was definitely not a professional smile. "Among other things." He gestured toward a seating area she hadn't noticed yesterday. 2 leather chairs positioned near a case containing what looked like a medieval psalter. "Please sit." As she settled into the buttery soft leather, Kieran moved to a small bar cart and poured 2 glasses of wine. The domesticity of the gesture, this billionaire serving her personally, felt surreal. "I have a proposition for you," he said, offering her a glass of what smelled like expensive burgundy. "It's unconventional, but then nothing about yesterday was conventional." Rosalie accepted the wine but didn't drink, too nervous to trust her coordination. "I'm listening. The curator position is yours if you want it. Full access to my collection, unlimited research budget, and a salary that would make your Columbia colleagues weep with envy." He settled into the chair across from her, those steel-gray eyes never leaving her face. "But that's just the beginning." "The beginning of what?" "Of us." The simple words hit her like a physical force. Rosalie set down her wine glass with trembling fingers. "Mr. Sterling. Kieran." His voice was firm. And before you start listing all the reasons this is impossible, let me tell you what I realized after you left yesterday." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, closing the distance between them until she could see the dark flecks in his gray eyes. "I've spent 15 years building walls, Rosalie. Emotional barriers that kept me safe, kept me focused, kept me from making the kinds of mistakes that destroy empires. But you—" He shook his head, a rueful smile playing at his lips. "You walked into my world and demolished every single one of those walls with 4 words. I don't understand. I've never been kissed. Do you know what that did to me? What it's still doing to me?" His hands clenched into fists on his knees. "I haven't been able to think about anything else. Not the Tokyo merger, not the quarterly reports, not the board meeting I'm supposed to be preparing for. Just you. Just the way you tasted, the way you sighed when I kissed you, the way you looked at me like I was something worth wanting." Heat flooded Rosalie's cheeks. "Kieran, I want to be your first everything, Rosalie. Your first kiss, your first lover, your first—" He stopped, running a hand through his hair. "Christ, I sound like a caveman." Despite her racing pulse, Rosalie couldn't help smiling. "A very articulate caveman. Say yes." The simple plea caught her off guard. "Yes to what exactly?" "To the job. To staying in New York. To letting me show you things you've only read about in those romance novels. I'm betting you have hidden under your bed." Rosalie's eyes widened. "How did you—" "Your browser history when you used my computer yesterday to look up the Lindisfarne reference." At her mortified expression, he chuckled. "Don't look so scandalized. I found it charming. All those historical romances, all those stories about innocent heroines and dangerous men who worship them. This is insane," she whispered. "We barely know each other." "I know enough." Kieran stood and began pacing, his controlled facade cracking to reveal something raw and hungry underneath. "I know you see beauty where others see dollar signs. I know you're brilliant enough to earn a PhD from Columbia, but genuine enough to blush when someone compliments you. I know you taste like honey and sin, and I know that when I kiss you, you melt against me like you were made to fit in my arms." Each word hit her like a small electric shock. This was insane, impossible, the kind of thing that happened in books, not to quiet librarians from small Connecticut towns. "What exactly are you proposing?" she asked, proud that her voice remained steady. "Move in with me." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Rosalie's wineglass slipped from her fingers, but Kieran caught it before it could hit the floor, his reflexes inhumanly quick. "Move in with you," she repeated faintly. "The penthouse has a separate wing with its own entrance. You'd have complete privacy when you want it, but—" His eyes darkened. "But I want you close, Rosalie. I want to have breakfast with you every morning and discuss medieval illumination techniques over dinner. I want to watch you discover your own passion, in every sense of the word. This is a business arrangement, then?" Something dangerous flashed in his expression. "Does this feel like business to you?" Before she could answer, he was kneeling beside her chair, his hands framing her face with the same reverence she'd seen him use when handling priceless manuscripts. "This is me asking you to take a chance on something that could be extraordinary," he said softly. "I can't promise it will be easy. I'm demanding, possessive, and I have enemies who would love to use someone I care about against me. But I can promise that if you say yes, I will worship every inch of you. I will show you pleasures you've never imagined, and I will never, ever let anyone hurt you." Rosalie stared into those storm-gray eyes and saw her future fracturing into 2 distinct paths. She could say no, go back to her safe life of dusty manuscripts and predictable routines. Or she could say yes and step into a world of silk sheets and private jets, of dangerous men and passionate nights. "The job comes with benefits," she said, surprised by her own boldness. Kieran's smile was pure sin, the best benefits package in the city. "And if it doesn't work out? Between us, I mean? Then you'll still have the most impressive curator position on the East Coast, and enough references to work anywhere in the world." His thumbs traced her cheekbones. "But it will work out." Chapter 4. Welcome to his world. Rosalie had never been in a Bentley before. The realization hit her as she sank into leather seats that probably cost more than her annual salary, watching Manhattan blur past tinted windows while Kieran spoke in rapid French to someone about acquiring the Venetian collection. Everything about this moment felt surreal. The luxury car, the billionaire beside her treating million-dollar art deals like grocery lists, the fact that she'd just agreed to move in with a man she'd known for exactly 26 hours. Second thoughts? Kieran asked, ending his call and turning those perceptive gray eyes on her. Third and fourth thoughts, she admitted. This morning I was eating cereal from a chipped bowl in a studio apartment that barely fits my bed. Now you're exactly where you belong. His hand found hers, fingers intertwining with casual possession that sent heat racing up her arm. Tell me about this apartment I'm about to see. Rosalie's cheeks flushed. It's not exactly penthouse material. I don't care if it's a cardboard box. It's yours, which means I want to see it. 20 minutes later, standing in the doorway of her cramped studio in the village, Rosalie watched Kieran Sterling, tech billionaire, art collector, man who owned buildings, taller than some small towns, take in her humble living space with the same focused intensity he'd used examining medieval manuscripts. The apartment was exactly as she'd left it that morning. Unmade bed with books scattered across the rumpled sheets, a stack of romance novels on the nightstand that made her want to die of embarrassment, instant coffee supplies on a counter barely large enough for one person, and academic papers covering every available surface. It's perfect, Kieran said quietly. It's tiny, Rosalie protested, and messy, and it's you. He moved to her bookshelf, scanning titles that ranged from scholarly texts on medieval art to an embarrassing number of historical romance novels. His finger trailed along the spine of one particularly steamy cover, and his mouth curved in amusement. The Highlander's Virgin Bride? Research, she said weakly. He pulled the book from the shelf and flipped through it, pausing at what was obviously a particularly explicit scene. Interesting research methodology. Kieran, don't be embarrassed. He set the book aside and turned to face her, something dark and hungry in his expression. Do you know what I'm thinking right now? She shook her head, not trusting her voice. I'm thinking about all those fantasies you've read, all those scenes you've imagined. He stepped closer, backing her against the kitchenette counter. I'm thinking about making every single one of them real for you. Before she could respond, he was kissing her again. But this time, there was nowhere to hide from the intensity. This wasn't the careful exploration from his office or the claiming kiss from earlier. This was raw need. 13 years of sexual fantasy meeting, 15 years of controlled passion. Rosalie melted against him, her hands fisting in his perfect suit jacket as he lifted her onto the narrow counter. The position put them at the same height, and when Kieran's hands framed her face, she could see herself reflected in his eyes, flushed, wanting, transformed. We should pack, she whispered against his lips, even as her body curved toward him. We should, he agreed, his mouth trailing down her throat in a way that made her forget her own name. But first, his hands found the hem of her dress, and Rosalie's breath caught. This was it. This was the moment her theoretical understanding of passion became reality, but instead of pushing forward, Kieran pulled back, his breathing ragged. Not here, he said roughly. Not in some cramped studio where I can't spread you across silk sheets and take my time worshipping every inch of you. The promise in his words made her shiver. Then let's pack quickly. Kieran's laugh was strained. Rosalie, if you keep looking at me like that, we won't make it out of this apartment. An hour later, Rosalie stared at the 3 suitcases that contained her entire life, while Kieran's driver loaded them into the Bentley. It seemed impossible that 24 years of existence could fit into such a small space. That's everything? Kieran asked, genuine surprise in his voice. I don't really accumulate things, she said, suddenly self-conscious. Books mostly, and my grandmother's jewelry. Something shifted in Kieran's expression. Show me. Rosalie opened her smallest suitcase and withdrew a worn velvet box. Inside, nestled against faded silk, lay her grandmother's wedding set, a simple gold band, and a modest diamond ring that had probably cost her grandfather a month's wages in 1952. She raised me after my parents died, Rosalie said quietly. These are all I have left of her. Kieran lifted the engagement ring, examining it with the same reverence he'd shown the illuminated manuscripts. "It's beautiful. Simple, honest, lasting." He looked up at her, "Like you." The drive back to Sterling Tower passed in comfortable silence. Rosalie's hand tucked securely in Kieran's while she watched the city transform from bohemian village streets to gleaming midtown towers. When they pulled into a private garage beneath Sterling Tower, reality hit her again. She was really doing this, moving in with a billionaire, becoming his... what exactly? Girlfriend seemed too casual, mistress too clinical, lover too intimate for something so new. The private elevator that whisked them to the penthouse was different from the public one she'd used for her interviews, all polished wood and subtle gold accents that screamed exclusivity. "Nervous?" Kieran asked as they rose past floor after floor. "Terrified," she admitted. "Good. If you weren't scared, it would mean you don't understand what you're getting into." The elevator opened directly into the penthouse, but not the scholarly sanctuary she remembered. This was clearly the residential section, all clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows, with furniture that looked like it belonged in architectural magazines. "Your wing is this way," Kieran said, leading her down a hallway lined with original paintings that probably cost more than most people's houses. "But first, let me show you the rest." The tour that followed redefined Rosalie's understanding of wealth. A master suite with a bed large enough to sleep 6 comfortably, a bathroom that could have doubled as a spa, a kitchen that looked like it had never been used, but contained appliances that cost more than cars, a dining room with a table for 12, and a view of Central Park that made her gasp aloud. "This is insane," she breathed, standing at the wall of windows overlooking the city that sprawled endlessly in every direction. "How do you live like this every day without feeling overwhelmed?" "You get used to it," Kieran said, but something in his voice suggested he wasn't entirely comfortable with the excess either. "Most of the time I forget it's there. I work, I sleep, I exist. Until yesterday, I couldn't remember the last time I actually looked at the view." "What changed yesterday?" He moved to stand behind her, his hands settling on her shoulders. "You did. You looked at my manuscript collection like it was treasure instead of investment. You saw beauty where I'd started seeing only dollar signs." His lips brushed her ear. "You reminded me what it feels like to want something more than success." Rosalie leaned back against his chest, marveling at how perfectly she fit against him. "Show me my room?" "Your suite," he corrected, leading her back down the hallway. The door he opened revealed a space that took her breath away. It was like stepping into a fairy tale, all soft blues and golds, with a canopy bed that looked like something from a medieval romance, and French doors that opened onto a private balcony. But what made her heart race was the alcove lined with custom bookshelves, clearly designed as a personal library. "Kieran," she whispered, moving toward the reading nook with its plush velvet chair and perfect lighting. "This is yours, all of it." He watched her explore the space, something possessive and satisfied in his expression. "The closet is stocked with clothes in your size. Vivian has an excellent eye. There's a private bathroom through that door, and this..." He pressed a switch that made part of the bookshelf swing inward. "Connects to my suite. For when you're ready." The implication hung between them, heavy with promise and possibility. Rosalie turned to face him, this powerful man who'd turned his world upside down for a woman he'd known less than 2 days. "What happens now?" she asked. Kieran's smile was slow, wicked, full of dark promise. "Now we have dinner. I want to watch you experience your first meal that costs more than most people spend in a week." He moved closer, his hand cupping her cheek. "And then, if you're willing, I'm going to start showing you exactly what you've been missing all these years." Rosalie's pulse hammered against her throat. "I'm willing." "Careful, sweetheart," Kieran murmured, his thumb tracing her lower lip. "I have a feeling once we start I won't be able to stop." Chapter 5. The First Lesson. Dinner was served on the terrace overlooking Central Park, at a table set for 2 with crystal that caught the city lights like captured stars. Rosalie had changed into one of the dresses from her mysteriously well-stocked closet, a flowing emerald silk that felt like liquid against her skin and fit her perfectly. "How did you know my size?" she asked as Kieran held her chair, his fingers brushing her bare shoulders in a touch that sent electricity racing down her spine. "I'm very observant," he said, his voice low and intimate, "and I have an excellent memory for beautiful things." The meal that followed was unlike anything Rosalie had ever experienced. Course after course of artfully arranged perfection, each bite a symphony of flavors she couldn't identify. Kieran watched her taste everything with the intensity of a man studying a fascinating manuscript. "You're staring," she said after the third course, warmth flooding her cheeks under his scrutiny. "I'm memorizing," he corrected, taking a sip of wine that probably cost more than her monthly rent. "The way you close your eyes when something tastes perfect. The little sound you make when you're pleased. I want to remember everything about your first night in my world." "Is that what this is? An initiation?" Something dark and possessive flickered in his gray eyes. "This is me showing you that you belong here. With me." He reached across the table to trace his fingers along her wrist. "Tell me what you're thinking." Rosalie set down her fork, meeting his gaze with growing boldness. "I'm thinking that in all those romance novels I've read, the heroine is always overwhelmed by luxury. But that's not what's overwhelming me. What is? The way you look at me. Like I'm something precious you're afraid might disappear." She turned her hand palm up, catching his fingers with hers. "I keep waiting to wake up and find this was all a dream." Kieran's grip tightened on her hand. "It's not a dream, Rosalie. This is real. What's between us is real." He stood abruptly, pulling her to her feet. "Come with me." Instead of leading her back inside, Kieran guided her to the edge of the terrace, where the city sprawled endlessly below them. The night air was cool against her skin, making her acutely aware of how the silk dress clung to her body and how close Kieran stood behind her. "Tell me about your first romance novel," he said, his hand settling on her waist. "What?" The question caught her off guard. "The first one you ever read. I want to know what shaped your fantasies." Rosalie leaned back against his chest, feeling his warmth seep through the silk. "I was 16. It was called The Duke's Innocent Ward. About an orphaned girl who goes to live with her guardian, a powerful, brooding duke who's supposed to protect her virtue but ends up being the one to claim it." Kieran's hands tightened on her waist. "And what happened to the innocent ward?" He taught her about passion, showed her pleasures she'd never imagined. The words came out breathless as Kieran's lips found the curve of her neck. He worshipped her body like she was something sacred. The sound vibrated against her throat. "And did she enjoy her education?" "Very much." Rosalie's eyes fluttered closed as Kieran's mouth traced patterns along her shoulder. "But it was just fantasy. I never thought what? That someone would want to worship me like that." Kieran spun her in his arms, his hands framing her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Rosalie Chen," he said, her name a rough prayer. "I am going to worship every inch of you. I'm going to learn every sound you make, every place that makes you tremble, every way to bring you pleasure. And when I'm done, you'll never doubt again that you deserve to be treasured." Before she could respond, his mouth claimed hers in a kiss that was nothing like the careful explorations from before. This was hunger, demand, a claiming that left no room for doubt about his intentions. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Kieran rested his forehead against hers. "Say yes," he whispered. "Yes to what? To letting me take you upstairs? To letting me show you what it feels like to be worshipped by a man who's been starving for you since the moment you walked into my life." Rosalie looked into those storm-gray eyes and saw her future balanced on a knife's edge. She could say no, retreat to her beautiful new suite, and maintain the careful distance that kept her safe. Or she could say yes and step fully into the fire that had been building between them. "Yes," she breathed. Kieran's smile was pure sin and satisfaction. Without another word, he swept her into his arms, carrying her inside with the ease of a man who'd never been denied anything he truly wanted. The elevator ride to his private floor felt eternal and far too short. Rosalie was hyper-aware of everything, the solid strength of his arms around her, the way his heart raced beneath her palm, the heat in his eyes that promised she was about to learn things no textbook had ever taught her. His master suite was a study in understated luxury, all dark wood and rich fabrics, but Rosalie barely registered the details. All her attention was focused on Kieran, as he set her gently on her feet beside the massive bed. "We go at your pace," he said, his hands gentle on her shoulders despite the barely leashed hunger in his voice. "If you want to stop at any point, I won't," she interrupted, surprising them both with her certainty. "I've been waiting my whole life for this. For you." Something primitive and possessive flashed in Kieran's eyes. "You're sure?" Instead of answering with words, Rosalie reached for the buttons of his shirt, her fingers trembling only slightly as she worked them free. Kieran stood perfectly still, letting her set the pace, but she could feel the tension coiled in his muscles like a predator waiting to pounce. When his shirt fell away, revealing a chest that belonged in Renaissance sculptures, Rosalie's breath caught. "You're beautiful," she whispered, her fingers tracing the defined planes of muscle. "Men aren't beautiful," Kieran said roughly. "You are." She looked up at him through her lashes, feeling bold and wanton, and completely unlike the shy librarian she'd been this morning. "You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." Kieran's control snapped visibly. His hands tangled in her hair, bringing her mouth to his in a kiss that was all fire and need. But even in his hunger, he was careful with her, gentle as he guided her backward until her legs hit the edge of the bed. "Tell me you want this," he demanded against her lips. "I want this," she gasped. "I want you. All of you." "Then let me love you, Rosalie," he whispered, his hands finding the zipper of her dress. "Let me show you how a woman should be treasured." As the emerald silk pooled at her feet, leaving her in nothing but moonlight and desire, Rosalie realized that every romance novel she'd ever read had been nothing but pale preparation for this moment, for Kieran Sterling looking at her like she was the answer to every prayer. He'd never known he was praying. "So beautiful," he murmured, his hands mapping every curve with reverent touches that made her tremble. "Perfect. Mine." And as he lowered her to the silk sheets with a gentleness that contrasted beautifully with the fierce possession in his eyes, Rosalie knew she was about to receive the most thorough education of her life. Her billionaire professor was ready to teach her everything about desire, and she was his most eager student. Chapter 6. Lessons in Passion. Kieran had imagined this moment 1,000 times in the past 24 hours, but nothing had prepared him for the reality of Rosalie spread across his silk sheets like a living masterpiece. Moonlight painted her skin silver, and when she looked up at him with those warm brown eyes full of trust and desire, something fundamental shifted in his chest. "You're trembling," she whispered, her fingers tracing the line of tension in his jaw. "You have no idea what you do to me," he said roughly, catching her hand and pressing it flat against his racing heart. "I've never wanted anything the way I want you." "Then take me." The simple words, spoken with such sweet certainty, nearly undid him completely. Kieran closed his eyes, fighting for control he'd never needed more desperately. "Not yet," he said, his voice strained. "First, I'm going to taste every inch of you. I'm going to learn what makes you sigh, what makes you arch beneath me, what makes you forget your own name." True to his word, Kieran began an exploration that was part worship, part claiming. His mouth traced patterns along her collarbone while his hands mapped the gentle curves of her waist, the soft swell of her hips. Every touch was reverent, patient, designed to build pleasure rather than rush toward it. "Kieran," Rosalie gasped when his lips found the sensitive spot where her neck met her shoulder. Her hands fisted in his hair, and the slight sting made him groan against her throat. "Tell me what you feel," he demanded softly. "I want to know everything." "Fire," she breathed. "Like I'm burning from the inside out. Like I've been asleep my whole life and you're finally waking me up." Her honesty, her complete lack of artifice, drove him wild. In his world, people calculated their responses, played games, used pleasure as currency, but Rosalie gave him truth, raw and unfiltered, and it was more intoxicating than any aphrodisiac. "More," she whispered when he paused, and Kieran's careful control slipped another notch. "Greedy girl," he murmured against her skin, but there was nothing but adoration in his voice. "Don't worry, sweetheart. I plan to give you everything." What followed was a slow, thorough education in desire. Kieran mapped every curve, every hollow, every place that made her gasp or moan or arch beneath his touch. He discovered that she was sensitive behind her ears, that she made the most incredible sound when he kissed the inside of her wrist, that she trembled when he whispered praise against her heated skin. "Please," Rosalie finally begged, her body strung tight as a bow beneath his ministrations. I don't know what I need, but I need something." "I know what you need," Kieran said, his voice dark with promise. "Trust me," and she did. Completely, utterly without reservation. The knowledge that she was placing herself entirely in his hands, that he would be her first experience of passion, made something primitive and possessive roar to life in his chest. When he finally joined with her, moving with infinite care, infinite patience, Rosalie's eyes flew wide with wonder, and something that looked suspiciously like tears. "Are you all right?" he asked, stilling completely despite every instinct screaming at him to move. "I'm perfect," she whispered, her hands framing his face with a tenderness that stopped his heart. "This is perfect. You're perfect." What happened next transcended everything Kieran thought he knew about physical intimacy. This wasn't just sex, it was connection, completion, two souls recognizing their missing piece. Every movement, every kiss, every whispered endearment built something between them that felt unbreakable. When Rosalie finally shattered beneath him, crying out his name like a prayer, Kieran followed her over the edge with a completeness he'd never experienced. For the first time in his life, he understood why people wrote poetry about love, why men conquered kingdoms for women, why some things were worth more than all the money in the world. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the moonlight, Rosalie's head on his chest, her fingers tracing lazy patterns on his skin. Kieran felt fundamentally changed, as if she'd reached inside him and rearranged something essential. "That was," Rosalie began, then trailed off with a soft laugh. "I don't have words." "Neither do I," Kieran admitted, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "And I'm usually very good with words." She tilted her face up to look at him, and the contentment in her expression made his chest tight. "All those romance novels got it wrong," she said softly. "How so?" "They made it sound like something you survive, like this overwhelming force that crashes over you and leaves you breathless." She traced his lips with one finger, but this felt like coming home, like finding a part of myself I didn't know was missing. Kieran caught her finger between his teeth, nipping gently before releasing it. "Careful, sweetheart. Keep talking like that, and I might start thinking you're falling in love with me." The words were meant to be teasing, but something serious flickered in Rosalie's eyes. Would that be so terrible? The question hit him like a physical blow. Love was a complication he'd never allowed himself, a vulnerability that could destroy everything he'd built. But looking into those warm brown eyes, feeling the rightness of her in his arms, Kieran found himself wanting things he'd never dared to imagine. "It would be dangerous," he said honestly. "For both of us. Why?" Instead of answering immediately, Kieran rolled them over, pinning her beneath him with gentle strength. "Because when I fall in love with you, and I will fall in love with you, Rosalie, I become the kind of man who would burn down the world to keep you safe. The kind of man who would destroy anyone who even thought about hurting you." His thumb traced her lower lip. "That kind of devotion isn't always pretty." "When you fall in love with me," she repeated, focusing on the part of his statement that made her pulse race. "Not if, when." "When," he confirmed, his voice rough with certainty. "It's already started, sweetheart. You've been under my skin since the moment you told me you'd never been kissed." Rosalie's smile was radiant. "Good, because I'm already halfway there myself." Something fierce and possessive blazed in Kieran's eyes. "Say it. Say what?" "That you're mine. That this—" He rolled his hips against hers, making her gasp. "Means you belong to me now." "I'm yours," Rosalie whispered, meaning it with every fiber of her being. "Completely, utterly yours." Kieran's response was to kiss her with a passion that promised he would never let her go. And as they lost themselves in each other again, both of them understood that what had started as attraction had become something infinitely more dangerous. They were falling in love. Rules be damned. And neither of them cared about the consequences. Outside the penthouse windows, the city glittered like scattered diamonds, but inside Kieran's bedroom, a billionaire and his innocent librarian were writing their own love story, one that would either save them both or destroy everything they thought they knew about love. Power, and the price of true intimacy. The only certainty was that there was no going back. Rosalie Chen belonged to Kieran Sterling now, body and soul, and he would move heaven and earth to keep her. Chapter 7. The First Storm. Rosalie woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of rain against floor-to-ceiling windows. For a moment, she lay perfectly still, letting herself absorb the reality of silk sheets against her naked skin and the lingering scent of Kieran's cologne on the pillow beside her. She was in Kieran Sterling's bed, in his penthouse, in his life. The events of the previous night rushed back in vivid detail. Dinner on the terrace, his reverent touches, the way he'd looked at her like she was something sacred. Her body still hummed with the memory of his hands, his mouth, the way he'd worshipped every inch of her until she'd forgotten her own name. Good morning. Beautiful. She turned to find Kieran leaning against the doorframe, fully dressed in a charcoal suit that made his gray eyes look like polished steel. He held 2 cups of coffee, and something about his posture, controlled, careful, made her pulse skip with unease. Morning, she said, suddenly aware of her nakedness beneath the sheet. You're dressed early. Board meeting at 9. He crossed to the bed, offering her one of the cups. Emergency session. Apparently, some of my investors are concerned about my recent distraction. The way he said the word made her stomach clench. Distraction? Kieran's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Someone photographed us at dinner last night. The pictures hit the society pages this morning. Rosalie felt the blood drain from her face. Pictures? Without a word, Kieran handed her his phone. The screen showed a gossip website with the headline, Sterling's Mystery Woman, Billionaire Tech Mogul. Spotted with unknown beauty in intimate dinner. The photos were clearly taken with a telephoto lens from a nearby building. Her and Kieran on the terrace, his hands on her waist, their heads close together in conversation. In the images, she looked like exactly what she was, a woman completely out of her depth, gazing up at a powerful man like he hung the moon. They don't know who I am yet, Kieran said, sitting on the edge of the bed. But they will. My world doesn't allow for anonymity, Rosalie. Once they identify you, what happens then? His hand found her cheek, thumb tracing the line of worry between her brows. Then you become a target. For reporters, for my business rivals, for anyone who thinks they can use you to get to me. The coffee cup trembled in Rosalie's hands. Maybe we should slow down. I could move back to my apartment. No. The word came out sharp, final. Kieran took the cup from her shaking hands and set it aside. Don't you dare run from this. From us. I'm not running. I'm being practical. If my being here causes problems for your business, fuck my business. The vehemence in his voice startled her. Do you think I care about a few nervous investors when I finally have something real in my life? Before she could respond, his phone buzzed. Kieran glanced at it, and his expression darkened. What is it? Rosalie asked Marcus. He wants to see me before the board meeting. Kieran's thumb hovered over the phone. He never calls unless it's serious. 20 minutes later, Rosalie found herself alone in the penthouse, wrapped in one of Kieran's shirts, staring out at the gray Manhattan morning. The rain matched her mood perfectly. Uncertain, turbulent, threatening. She'd been in Kieran's world for exactly 18 hours, and already the cracks were showing. In her romance novels, the heroine's past never mattered. The media never interfered, and love conquered all obstacles with passionate declarations and grand gestures. Reality, apparently, was messier. The elevator chimed, and Rosalie turned, expecting Kieran. Instead, a tall blonde woman in a perfectly tailored designer suit stepped into the living room. She was stunning in the way that spoke of expensive maintenance and genetic lottery wins, with the kind of confidence that came from never being denied anything. You must be the mystery woman, the stranger said, her voice carrying the crisp authority of old money. I'm Victoria Ashworth, Kieran's former associate. Something in the way she said associate made Rosalie's skin crawl. I'm Rosalie Chen, and you are? The woman who's going to explain exactly what you've gotten yourself into. Victoria moved through the space with the familiarity of someone who'd spent considerable time there. May I? She gestured to the seating area without waiting for permission, settling onto the leather sofa with practiced grace. Rosalie remained standing, Kieran's shirt falling to mid-thigh, suddenly feeling underdressed and outclassed. Let me guess, Victoria continued, crossing her legs with predatory elegance. Kieran swept you off your feet with expensive dinners and private jets. Told you that you were different from all the others. Made you feel special, chosen, irreplaceable. Each word hit like a small blade. How did you get up here? I have my ways. The question is, how long do you think you'll last? Victoria's smile was razor sharp. I give it 2 weeks. Maybe 3 if you're very good in bed. You don't know anything about us, Rosalie said, but her voice lacked conviction. Don't I? I know Kieran Sterling better than anyone. I know he gets bored easily, that he views relationships like business mergers, temporary, strategic, ultimately disposable. I know that right now, his board is discussing whether his involvement with you makes him a liability. Victoria stood, moving to the window where Rosalie had been standing moments before. Do you know what they're saying about you down there? That you're a gold digger who seduced him for his money. That you're a distraction that could cost Sterling Industries billions in the Tokyo merger. That's not true. Truth doesn't matter in our world, darling. Perception does. And right now, the perception is that Kieran Sterling has lost his legendary focus over some nobody librarian. The casual cruelty in Victoria's voice made Rosalie's hands clench into fists. Why are you telling me this? Because I actually like Kieran, despite our history. And I can see that you care about him too. Victoria turned from the window, her expression almost gentle. If you really love him, you'll walk away before you destroy everything he's worked for. The elevator chimed again, and this time it was Kieran, his face thunderous as he took in the scene. Victoria looking perfectly at home in his living room, Rosalie pale and shaken in his oversized shirt. Victoria, he said, his voice deadly quiet. What the hell are you doing here? Protecting your interests, as always. Victoria's smile didn't waver. Though I think our conversation is finished. Isn't it, Rosalie? Rosalie looked between them, seeing the history written in their body language, the familiarity that spoke of intimate knowledge. I should let you two talk privately. Don't. Kieran's command stopped her retreat. Whatever Victoria has to say, she can say it in front of you. How gallant, Victoria murmured. But I've said what I came to say. She moved toward the elevator with feline grace. Think about what we discussed, Rosalie. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let someone go. The elevator doors closed behind her, leaving Kieran and Rosalie alone in the sudden silence. What did she say to you? Kieran asked, his voice carefully controlled. That I'm going to destroy your business empire. That your board thinks I'm a liability. That you get bored with women and move on. The words tumbled out in a rush. Is any of it true? Kieran's hands clenched at his sides. Victoria Ashworth is a manipulative bitch who can't stand to see me happy. That's not an answer. Fine. He moved closer, backing her against the window. Yes, the board is concerned. Yes, there are rumors about us affecting the Tokyo deal. And yes, I have a history of short relationships. Each admission felt like a physical blow, so she was right. No. Kieran framed her face with his hands, forcing her to meet his gaze. She was wrong about the only thing that matters. You're not a distraction, Rosalie. You're not some temporary fascination I'll discard when I get bored. Then what am I? His answer came without hesitation, fierce and certain. You're the woman I'm going to marry. The words hung between them like a thunderclap, shocking them both with their intensity. Kieran's eyes widened as if he couldn't believe what he'd just said, while Rosalie stared at him in stunned silence. Kieran, I know it's insane, he said roughly. I know it's too fast, too soon, too everything. But Victoria was right about one thing. I've never felt this way before. Never wanted to build something permanent with someone. You're proposing to me? Rosalie's voice came out as barely a whisper. I'm telling you that I love you, Kieran said, his voice raw with honesty. I'm telling you that whatever storm is coming, we face it together. And I'm telling you that if you run now, if you let Victoria or the board or anyone else scare you away, you'll be making the biggest mistake of both our lives." Outside, thunder rumbled across the city, and Rosalie realized she was standing at the most important crossroads of her life. She could listen to Victoria's warnings, protect herself from the inevitable scrutiny and potential heartbreak, or she could trust the man who just handed her his heart without reservation. The choice, terrifying as it was, had never been clearer. Chapter 8. Love and War. "Say something," Kieran said, his hands still framing Rosalie's face, his gray eyes searching hers with invulnerability she'd never seen before. "Please, sweetheart, say something." Rosalie stared at the man who'd just turned her world upside down. Again. 24 hours ago, she'd been a quiet librarian whose biggest decision was whether to splurge on expensive coffee. Now she was standing in a billionaire's penthouse, wearing his shirt, while he declared his love and talked about marriage. "This is insane," she whispered. Kieran's face shuddered, and he started to pull away, but Rosalie caught his wrists, holding his hands against her cheeks. "This is insane," she repeated, her voice growing stronger. "And I don't care." Hope flickered in his eyes. "Rosalie, I love you too," she said, the words spilling out like a dam bursting. "I know it's crazy. I know it's too fast. I know Victoria is probably right about a dozen different things. But I love you, Kieran Sterling. I love your intensity and your passion, and the way you look at medieval manuscripts like they're sacred texts. I love that you carried me up here like I was something precious. And I love that you're willing to fight your entire board of directors for me." Kieran's response was to kiss her with such fierce joy that she laughed against his mouth. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, his forehead rested against hers. "Is that a yes?" he asked. "To which part? The loving you part or the marrying you part?" "Both. All of it. Everything." Rosalie looked into those storm-gray eyes and saw her future, complicated, challenging, but blazing with a love she'd only read about in books. "Yes to all of it." Kieran's smile was radiant. "Good. Because we're about to go to war, sweetheart. And I need to know you're with me. What kind of war?" Before he could answer, his phone buzzed insistently. Kieran glanced at it and his expression darkened. Marcus again. The board meeting moved up to 8:30. He looked at his watch. "I have 40 minutes to get downtown and save my company." "Then go," Rosalie said, even though the thought of him leaving made her stomach clench with anxiety. "Come with me." The suggestion caught her off guard. "To your board meeting?" "To everything. I'm done hiding what we have, done pretending you're not the most important thing in my life." Kieran's hands tightened on her waist. "If they want to see the woman who's supposedly destroying my focus, let them see you. Let them see why I'd rather lose every penny than lose you." 20 minutes later, Rosalie found herself in the back of the Bentley, wearing a navy suit from her mysteriously perfect wardrobe, watching Manhattan blur past while Kieran made rapid-fire calls in 3 different languages. "Tell them the Beijing contract is non-negotiable. I don't care what the journal is reporting. Reschedule the Tokyo representatives until this afternoon." Between calls, he reached for her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm in a gesture that was becoming familiar. "Nervous?" "Terrified," she admitted. "I don't know anything about business or board meetings or—" "You don't need to know anything except that you belong at my side," Kieran interrupted. "These people work for me, Rosalie, not the other way around." Sterling Industries occupied floors 30 through 50 of a gleaming tower in the financial district. The lobby was all marble and steel, with abstract sculptures that probably cost more than most people's houses. Employees in expensive suits moved with the focused energy of people handling billion-dollar decisions before breakfast. The ride up to the executive floor felt like ascending to Olympus. Kieran's assistant Vivian was waiting when the elevator opened, her usually perfect composure showing stress cracks. "Thank God you're here," she said without preamble. "Marcus has been fielding calls since 6 a.m. The Times wants a statement. The Journal is running a piece on your mystery girlfriend. Even 3 board members have called emergency meetings." "Let them call all the meetings they want," Kieran said grimly. "Where's Marcus? Conference room A and Kieran?" Vivian glanced meaningfully at Rosalie. Victoria Ashworth is in there with them. Something dangerous flashed in Kieran's eyes. Perfect. The conference room was a study in power and intimidation. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor, a table that could seat 20, and walls lined with awards and photos of Kieran with world leaders and tech moguls. 8 people sat around the polished table, and their conversation died the moment Kieran entered with Rosalie at his side. Gentlemen, Victoria. Kieran's voice was arctic as he pulled out a chair for Rosalie before taking his place at the head of the table. I understand you have concerns about my personal life. Marcus Blackwood, Kieran's business partner and oldest friend, looked profoundly uncomfortable. Kieran, we need to discuss the potential ramifications. Of what? Of me falling in love? Kieran's tone could have frozen hell itself. Please elaborate. An older man with silver hair and cold eyes leaned forward. The Tokyo merger is worth $12 billion, Kieran. Yamamoto Industries has built their reputation on discretion and traditional values. Photos of you carrying on with some... Choose your next words very carefully. Richardson, Kieran said softly, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Victoria, looking perfectly polished in a cream-colored suit, stepped into the charged silence. What Gerald is trying to say is that Yamamoto's board is concerned about stability. They're wondering if your judgment might be compromised. My judgment, Kieran repeated slowly, has been compromised by falling in love with a brilliant, accomplished woman who happens to hold advanced degrees from Columbia University and is one of the foremost experts on medieval manuscripts in the country. Rosalie felt heat flood her cheeks as every eye in the room turned to her. She'd never felt smaller or more out of place. That's not the issue, Richardson pressed. The issue is timing and optics. Dating is one thing, but moving a virtual stranger into your penthouse after 2 days? It looks impulsive. Reckless. Impulsive, Kieran mused, standing slowly. The movement was casual, but everyone in the room seemed to shrink back slightly. Let me tell you about Impulsive, Richardson. Impulsive was betting my entire inheritance on an algorithm when I was 26. Impulsive was acquiring Chen Industries when every analyst said it was a mistake. Impulsive was developing the Sterling protocol that revolutionized data security. He placed his hands flat on the table, leaning forward with predatory grace. Every major decision I've made in the past 15 years has looked impulsive to small minds who can't see beyond quarterly reports. And every single one of those decisions has made this company, and every person in this room, obscenely wealthy. The silence was deafening. Rosalie could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. Now, Kieran continued, his voice deadly quiet, let me make something very clear. Rosalie Chen is not my distraction. She's not my midlife crisis or my passing fancy. She's the woman I'm going to marry, which makes her family. And in this company, we protect family. Richardson's face had gone pale. Kieran, be reasonable. I am being reasonable. Here's what's going to happen. Kieran straightened, his presence dominating the room. Ms. Chen is going to be introduced as my fiancé at the charity gala next week. The Tokyo merger will proceed as planned, because Yamamoto needs our technology more than we need their approval. And anyone who has a problem with my personal choices is welcome to tender their resignation. The words hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down. Rosalie watched powerful men and women who probably controlled billions of dollars shift uncomfortably under Kieran's stare. Marcus cleared his throat. Kieran, perhaps we could discuss this privately. No. Kieran's gaze never wavered from Richardson's face. We're done discussing my private life in boardrooms. Are we clear? One by one, the board members nodded their agreement. Only Victoria remained unmoved, her smile sharp as a blade. Well played, she said softly. But you might want to ask your fiancé how she feels about being thrown to the wolves for the sake of a merger. All eyes turned to Rosalie, who felt her mouth go dry. This was it. Her moment to prove she belonged in Kieran's world or crumble under the pressure. She thought of her grandmother, who'd raised 5 children during the Depression and never backed down from a fight. She thought of every romance heroine who'd ever faced down dragons for love. Most of all, she thought of Kieran's hand in hers. Steady and sure, I think, Rosalie said, her voice clear and when the room finally cleared, leaving only Kieran, Rosalie, and Marcus, the tension that had been coiling in Rosalie's stomach finally released. That she said, sinking into her chair, was terrifying. That, Kieran corrected, pulling her to her feet and into his arms. Was you proving that you belong here? With me, in this life. Marcus gathered his papers, grinning. I'll handle the press releases and damage control. You two have a wedding to plan. As the door closed behind him, Kieran cupped Rosalie's face in his hands. No regrets? Only one, she said, her arms winding around his neck. What's that? That it took me 24 years to find you. Kieran's kiss was answer enough. They had a war to fight and a merger to save and a wedding to plan, but in that moment none of it mattered. They had each other, and they had love, and sometimes that was enough to conquer the world. Chapter 9. Under the Spotlight. The charity gala was in 3 days, and Rosalie was having a panic attack in the middle of Bergdorf Goodman. I can't do this, she said for the 15th time, staring at her reflection in a mirror surrounded by gowns that cost more than her former annual salary. I look like I'm playing dress-up in my mother's clothes. Helena Rodriguez, the personal stylist Kieran had insisted on hiring, tisked disapprovingly. You look stunning, Miss Chen. The Valentino is perfect for your figure. The emerald green gown was undeniably beautiful, silk that flowed like water, a neckline that was sophisticated without being revealing, and a color that made her skin glow. It was also $12,000 for one dress that she would wear for one evening. It's too much, Rosalie said, reaching for the zipper. All of this is too much. Hey. Kieran's voice came from behind her, warm and reassuring. She turned to find him leaning against the doorframe of the private fitting room, his eyes dark with appreciation. You look breathtaking. I look expensive, she corrected. There's a difference. No, sweetheart. You look like exactly what you are, the future Mrs. Sterling. He moved behind her, his hands settling on her shoulders as they both faced the mirror. What's really bothering you? Rosalie met his eyes in the reflection. The guest list arrived this morning. Kieran's hands tightened slightly on her shoulders. And? Senators, ambassadors, tech moguls, Hollywood royalty. She trailed off, anxiety making her voice thin. Kieran, these people are going to take one look at me and know I don't belong. They're going to take one look at you and know exactly why I fell in love. You don't understand. Rosalie turned in his arms, her hands fisting in his suit jacket. I looked up some of the women who'll be there. Victoria Ashworth, obviously. Catherine Montenegro, the pharmaceutical heiress. Anastasia Volkov, the Russian ambassador's daughter. These women went to Swiss finishing schools and have trust funds older than I am. And I learned to use a fork properly by watching YouTube videos. Kieran's laugh was soft, fond. Do you know what I was doing at my first charity gala? Being devastatingly charming and inherently sophisticated? Throwing up in the bathroom because I was so nervous about people realizing I was just a scholarship kid from Detroit who'd gotten lucky with an algorithm. His thumbs traced her cheekbones. Money doesn't make you worthy, Rosalie. Character does. Integrity does. The way you light up when you talk about medieval manuscripts, and the way you argue with board members when you think they're wrong. That's what makes you extraordinary. Before Rosalie could respond, Helena cleared her throat. Mr. Sterling, the jewelry representative is here. What followed was another surreal experience in Rosalie's rapidly expanding new world. A security guard wheeled in a case containing what looked like the crown jewels, while a distinguished man in a perfectly pressed suit began displaying necklaces that could have funded small countries. The Cartier emeralds would complement the dress beautifully, he suggested, lifting a necklace that made Rosalie's breath catch. It's too much, she whispered. It's perfect, Kieran countered, moving behind her to fasten the necklace around her throat. The emeralds were cool against her skin, and when she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. I look like someone else entirely, she said softly. You look like you, Kieran corrected. Just dressed for the part you were always meant to play. 2 hours later, they left Bergdorf with enough bags to stock a small boutique. Rosalie sat in the back of the Bentley, still overwhelmed by the afternoon's events, while Kieran fielded calls about merger negotiations and security arrangements for the gala. Tell Yamamoto we're ready to finalize whenever they are. Double the security at the hotel entrance. He paused mid-sentence, noticing Rosalie's expression. Let me call you back, he said into the phone, then turned his full attention to her. Talk to me. This is really happening, isn't it? She said quietly. In 3 days, I'm going to be introduced to New York society as your fiancé. Having second thoughts? Third and fourth thoughts, she admitted, echoing their conversation from days earlier. What if I say something wrong? What if I use the wrong fork or trip in those heels, or what if you're absolutely perfect, just like you were in that boardroom? Kieran pulled her closer, until she was tucked against his side. Rosalie, I need you to understand something. I'm not asking you to become someone else. The woman I fell in love with is brilliant, passionate, genuine. Don't lose her trying to become someone you think you should be. That evening, they had dinner on the penthouse terrace again, but this time the atmosphere was different. Charged. Electric with anticipation and underlying tension. Tomorrow, the merger documents would be signed. In 3 days, they would make their public debut as a couple. Nervous about tomorrow? Rosalie asked, watching Kieran push food around his plate without really eating. About the merger? No. Yamamoto needs our encryption technology more than we need their manufacturing capabilities. He set down his fork, reaching for her hand across the table. I'm nervous about Saturday. The gala? Why? Because the moment we walk into that ballroom together, everything changes. No more quiet dinners on the terrace. No more privacy. Every aspect of our relationship becomes public property. His grip tightened on her fingers. I'm terrified I'm asking too much of you. Rosalie studied his face in the candlelight, seeing the vulnerability he tried so hard to hide. Do you know what I realized today? While I was panicking about forks and finishing schools? What? That I was thinking about this all wrong. I kept focusing on what I don't know, what I don't have. But then I remembered something my grandmother used to tell me. She smiled, the memory warming her from the inside. She said that confidence isn't about knowing everything. It's about knowing who you are and being proud of it. Smart woman, your grandmother. She was, and she would have loved you. Rosalie lifted their joined hands, pressing a kiss to his knuckles. I know who I am, Kieran. I'm a woman who loves medieval manuscripts and terrible reality TV shows. I cry during commercials, and I still sleep with a stuffed elephant my grandmother gave me when I was 7. I've never been on a yacht or to the Met Gala, and I think caviar tastes like salty fish eggs. Kieran's laugh was pure delight. And I'm also the woman you love. The woman who stood up to your board of directors and meant every word of it. The woman who's going to wear a $12,000 dress and emeralds worth more than most people's cars, and I'm going to do it because I belong at your side. Her voice grew stronger, more certain, not because of the dress or the jewels, but because we belong together. The pride in Kieran's eyes made her chest tight with emotion. There she is, he said softly. There's my fierce, brilliant fiancé. Is that what I am now? Officially, instead of answering with words, Kieran reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Rosalie's breath caught as he moved from his chair to kneel beside hers. Rosalie Chen, he said, his voice rough with emotion. You are the most extraordinary woman I've ever known. You see beauty where others see dollar signs. You find wonder in centuries-old ink and parchment, and you make me want to be worthy of the love you give so freely. He opened the box, revealing a ring that made her grandmother's modest diamond look like a grain of sand. Will you marry me? Officially, publicly, forever? The ring was stunning. A flaw. His mouth claimed hers in a kiss that promised the night was just beginning. As Kieran swept her toward the bedroom, Rosalie caught her reflection in the darkened windows. A woman wearing a fortune in diamonds, being carried by a billionaire who looked at her like she was his greatest treasure. 3 days ago, she'd been a quiet librarian whose biggest decision was whether to splurge on expensive coffee. Now she was engaged to the most powerful man in the city, about to make her debut in society, and more desperately in love than she'd ever imagined possible. The charity gala would be her trial by fire, her official introduction to Kieran's world. But tonight, she was simply his, completely, utterly, joyfully his, and that was more than enough. Chapter 10. Trial by Fire. The Metropolitan Museum's Great Hall had been transformed into something from a fairy tale. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light over marble columns draped in silk, while orchids and roses in shades of cream and blush created an atmosphere of understated opulence. New York's elite moved through the space like exotic birds in their designer plumage, their laughter and conversation creating a symphony of wealth and power. Rosalie stood before the full-length mirror in the museum's private suite, her reflection showing a woman she barely recognized. The emerald Valentino fit like a second skin. The Cartier emeralds glowed against her throat, and her hair had been arranged in an elegant updo that showcased the matching earrings. She looked every inch the billionaire's fiancé. So why did her hands shake as she smoothed the silk for the 10th time? "You look magnificent," said Elena Martinez, the publicist Kieran had hired specifically for tonight. "Remember, smile, be gracious, and let Mr. Sterling handle any difficult questions." "What constitutes a difficult question?" Rosalie asked, her voice tighter than she'd intended. "Anything about your background, your relationship timeline, your previous experience with high society." Elena's smile was professionally bright. "The key is to redirect to safer topics. The charity, your work with manuscripts, how wonderful Mr. Sterling is." A knock on the door interrupted them. "Come in," Rosalie called. Kieran stepped into the room and her breath caught. He wore a perfectly tailored black tuxedo that emphasized every lean line of his body, his dark hair slightly tousled as if he'd been running his hands through it. But it was his expression that made her pulse stutter. Pride, possession, and something that looked suspiciously like nervousness. "You're stunning," he said simply, crossing to her side. "Absolutely breathtaking." "You clean up pretty well yourself," she managed, adjusting his bow tie with trembling fingers. "Hey." Kieran caught her hands, stilling their movement. "Look at me." She met his gray eyes, seeing her own anxiety reflected there. "Whatever happens out there," he said quietly, "we face it together." "You are not alone in this, Rosalie. I will not let anyone make you feel less than the extraordinary woman you are." Before she could respond, Elena cleared her throat. "Mr. Sterling, the photographer is ready for formal shots before you make your entrance." The next 30 minutes passed in a blur of camera flashes and staged poses. Kieran's arm around her waist, both of them smiling at the camera, close-ups of her ring that would undoubtedly grace tomorrow's society pages. Through it all, Kieran's presence anchored her, his quiet murmurs of encouragement keeping her panic at bay. "Ready?" he asked as they stood at the entrance to the Great Hall. Rosalie took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the emeralds at her throat, the unfamiliar tightness of the couture gown, the foreign sensation of being the center of attention. "As ready as I'll ever be." "Ladies and gentlemen," the master of ceremonies announced, his voice carrying over the crowd. "Please welcome Mr. Kieran Sterling and his fiancée, Miss Rosalie Chen." The conversations didn't stop exactly, but they shifted, hundreds of eyes turning toward them with undisguised curiosity. Rosalie felt every gaze like a physical weight, cataloging everything from her dress to her jewelry, to the way she walked in heels that had required an hour of practice. They moved through the crowd like royalty, Kieran introducing her to a dizzying array of influential people whose names she'd only read in newspapers. Senator Morrison and his wife, the Italian ambassador, the CEO of Montenegro Pharmaceuticals. Each introduction was a small performance, smile and nod, and gracious acknowledgement of their congratulations. "Miss Chen," said a woman with silver hair and diamonds that could fund a small nation. "How fascinating that you're a manuscript specialist. Such an unusual profession." The pause before unusual carried enough judgment to sink a ship. Rosalie felt her smile waver for just a moment before Kieran's hand tightened on her waist. "Unusual and invaluable," he said smoothly. Rosalie's expertise in medieval illumination has been instrumental in several major acquisitions for the Sterling collection. Her doctoral thesis on insular script was groundbreaking work. The woman's expression shifted slightly, surprise replacing dismissal. "How interesting. And where did you study?" "Columbia," Rosalie said, finding her voice. "I specialized in manuscript preservation and art historical analysis." "Impressive," the woman admitted, though she looked like the praise cost her something. They moved on, but Rosalie caught the whispered conversations that followed in their wake. Heard she was nobody special. PhD from Columbia. Apparently that ring must be worth a fortune. Wonder how long this one will last. Each comment was a small cut, death by 1,000 whispers. By the time they reached their table, Rosalie felt like she'd been flayed alive by polite curiosity and barely concealed judgment. "You're doing beautifully," Kieran murmured in her ear as they took their seats. "I feel like a lab specimen under a microscope." "You feel like that because you are," said a familiar voice. Victoria Ashworth slid into the seat beside them, resplendent in silver silk that matched her predatory smile. "But you're handling it better than most would." "Victoria," Kieran said coolly, "I wasn't aware you'd be joining our table. Last-minute addition. I hope you don't mind." Her smile suggested she didn't care if he minded or not. "I thought it might be helpful to have a friendly face nearby." Nothing about Victoria's face looked particularly friendly, but before Kieran could respond, the evening's program began. The charity auction was in full swing when disaster struck. "Our next item," the auctioneer announced, "is a private dinner for 8, with renowned art historian and manuscript expert, Dr. Jonathan Whitfield, generously donated by the Whitfield Foundation." Rosalie's blood turned to ice. Dr. Jonathan Whitfield, her former thesis advisor, the man who destroyed her academic confidence with cutting criticism disguised as mentorship, the reason she'd chosen quiet library work over pursuing her dreams of research and publication. "Kieran," she whispered, but he was already looking at her with concern, clearly sensing her distress. "What is it?" Before she could answer, a spotlight found their table, and the auctioneer's voice boomed across the hall. "And I understand we have a special guest tonight who studied under Dr. Whitfield. Miss Rosalie Chen, Mr. Sterling's lovely fiancée, is herself a manuscript specialist with a PhD from Columbia. Perhaps she could tell us about the value of this extraordinary opportunity." Every eye in the room turned to Rosalie. The spotlight felt like being trapped under a magnifying glass in the sun. Her mouth went dry, her palms damp, and for a horrible moment she couldn't remember how to speak. The silence stretched, becoming awkward, then painful. She could see people beginning to whisper, to exchange glances that clearly questioned her qualifications, her intelligence, her worthiness to be sitting beside Kieran Sterling. "Stand up," Victoria whispered urgently. "Say something. Anything." Rosalie tried to rise, but her legs felt like water. This was it, the moment she proved every doubter right, the moment she revealed herself as the imposter she'd always feared she was. Then Kieran's hand found hers under the table, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture of absolute support. She looked at him and saw not disappointment or embarrassment, but fierce pride and unwavering confidence. "You've got this, sweetheart," he said quietly, for her ears alone. "Show them who you are." Something inside Rosalie shifted, like tumblers falling into place in a lock. She thought of her grandmother, who'd faced down the Great Depression with nothing but determination and grace. She thought of every manuscript she'd lovingly restored, every historical mystery she'd unraveled with patient research. She thought of the woman who'd stood up to Kieran's board of directors and meant every word. Rosalie stood, the spotlight catching the emeralds at her throat and setting them ablaze. When she spoke, her voice was clear and strong, carrying easily through the suddenly silent hall. "Dr. Whitfield is indeed one of the foremost authorities on medieval manuscripts," she began, surprising herself with her composure. "But more than that, he's a teacher who challenges his students to see beyond the obvious, to find the human stories hidden in centuries-old ink and parchment." She paused, letting her gaze sweep the room, seeing faces that had been skeptical now showing genuine interest. "When I studied the Lindisfarne Gospels under his guidance, he taught me that we weren't just looking at artistic technique or historical documentation. We were witnessing the passion of monks who believed so deeply in beauty that they spent years creating something designed to last for eternity. That kind of insight, the ability to see the human heart behind historical artifacts, is what makes Dr. Whitfield's mentorship invaluable." The room erupted in applause, and Rosalie felt a surge of triumph unlike anything she'd ever experienced. She'd done it. She'd faced down her greatest fear and emerged victorious. "Beautifully said. the auctioneer declared. Now, shall we start the bidding at $5,000? As the auction continued around them, Kieran leaned over to whisper in her ear, "That was magnificent. I've never been more proud of anyone in my life." But even as warmth flooded through her at his praise, Rosalie noticed Victoria watching her with something that might have been genuine respect, and something else that looked suspiciously like calculation. The evening was far from over, and she had the distinct feeling that her moment in the spotlight had just made her an even bigger target. But for now, she'd proven something to herself and to everyone watching. She wasn't just Kieran Sterling's pretty accessory, she was a force to be reckoned with in her own right. And that realization was intoxicating. Chapter 11. The Morning After. Rosalie woke to sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows and the sound of Kieran's voice drifting from the living room. She stretched languidly in the silk sheets, her body still humming with the afterglow of their celebration the night before. The gala had ended in triumph, but their private celebration had been even more spectacular. Rolling over, she reached for her phone and immediately wished she hadn't. The screen was flooded with notifications. Text messages, missed calls, social media alerts, and news notifications that made her stomach clench with anxiety. With trembling fingers, she opened the first news alert. Sterling's scholarly surprise. Mystery fiancé proves she's more than just a pretty face. The article featured a photo of her at the podium, emeralds glittering under the spotlight, looking every inch the sophisticated art historian she'd fought so hard to become. But it was the comments section that made her breath catch. Finally, a billionaire's girlfriend with actual brains. She's stunning and smart. Sterling hit the jackpot. Did anyone else notice how perfectly she handled that moment? Class act. But mixed with the praise were darker comments. Wonder how long before he gets bored and trades her in for a newer model. Convenient how she happened to have expertise in exactly his collecting area, gold. Digger with a PhD is still a gold digger. Good morning. Beautiful. Rosalie looked up to find Kieran in the doorway, fully dressed in a charcoal suit, holding 2 cups of coffee. But his smile faded when he saw her expression. What's wrong? He crossed to the bed, setting the coffee on the nightstand and settling beside her. The reviews are in, she said, handing him her phone. Kieran scrolled through the articles and comments, his jaw tightening with each swipe. Ignore them. You were magnificent last night, was I? Or was I just playing a part? The question had been nagging at her since she'd woken up. That woman who stood up there and spoke so confidently about Dr. Whitfield. That felt like someone else entirely. That was you, Rosalie. The real you that you've been hiding behind self-doubt and insecurity. Kieran set the phone aside and cupped her face in his hands. That brilliant, passionate woman is who I fell in love with. Before she could respond, his phone buzzed. Then buzzed again. And again. Popular morning, she observed. Kieran glanced at his phone and something shifted in his expression. It's not all good news. Get dressed, sweetheart. We need to talk to Marcus. An hour later, they sat in Marcus's office overlooking Wall Street, while Kieran's business partner paced behind his desk like a caged tiger. The Tokyo deal is off, Marcus said without preamble. Yamamoto pulled out this morning. Rosalie felt the blood drain from her face. Because of me? Because of the media attention, Marcus corrected, but it felt like a distinction without a difference. Apparently, Yamamoto's board considers the personal drama a distraction from serious business negotiations. Personal drama, Kieran repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. You mean my engagement? I mean the circus. The society page coverage. The speculation about Rosalie's background. The betting pools on how long your relationship will last. Marcus stopped pacing and faced them both. Yamamoto wants to wait 6 months to see if things settle down. 6 months, Kieran said flatly. They want to see if I'm still with Rosalie in 6 months. That's the subtext, yes. The silence in the room was deafening. Rosalie stared at her hands, the enormous diamond on her finger suddenly feeling like a weight, rather than a symbol of love. This is my fault, she said quietly. No. Kieran's voice cracked like a whip. This is the fault of small-minded people who can't separate personal life from business competence. Kieran, Marcus said gently, Yamamoto represents $12 billion in revenue and access to Asian markets. We can't just dismiss, watch me. Kieran stood abruptly, his presence filling the room. Draft a press release. Sterling Industries is withdrawing from negotiations with Yamamoto. Permanently. You can't be serious. Deadly serious. Any company that thinks they can dictate my personal life isn't a company I want to partner with. Marcus looked between Kieran and Rosalie, clearly struggling with the magnitude of what was being discussed. Kieran, be reasonable. $12 billion is a fraction of what I'm worth, and significantly less valuable than the woman I love. Rosalie's heart clenched at the fierce certainty in his voice, but the practical part of her mind was screaming warnings. Maybe we should consider— No! Kieran turned to her, his eyes blazing with intensity. Don't you dare suggest we should accommodate their prejudices. What happened to the woman who stood up to my board of directors? The woman who dazzled a room full of New York's elite last night? That woman might have just cost you $12 billion, Rosalie said, her voice breaking slightly. That woman just proved she's worth 100 times that. Before either of them could respond, Marcus's assistant buzzed through the intercom. Mr. Blackwood? Victoria Ashworth is here to see you. She says it's urgent. Marcus and Kieran exchanged glances. Send her in, Marcus said. Victoria entered like a force of nature, her usual polished composure replaced by something that looked suspiciously like excitement. She wore a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than most people's cars. But it was her expression that caught Rosalie's attention. Calculating, triumphant, and slightly predatory. Gentlemen? Rosalie. Victoria's smile was sharp as a blade. I come bearing gifts. What kind of gifts? Kieran asked warily. The kind that solve your Yamamoto problem. Victoria settled into a chair with feline grace. I've just spent the morning on calls with 3 different European consortiums who are very interested in the Sterling encryption technology. 3? Marcus leaned forward, business instincts clearly piqued. Frankfurt Financial, the Zurich Banking Collective, and Milano Tech Industries. Combined, they're offering $18 billion for exclusive European licensing rights. Victoria's smile widened. Seems your public romance has made you quite the celebrity in international business circles. They love the narrative. Brilliant billionaire finds love with intellectual beauty. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Rosalie looked between the 3 faces around her, seeing calculations and possibilities written in their expressions. 18 billion, Marcus repeated slowly. That's 50% more than Yamamoto was offering, Victoria finished. Plus, European partnerships come with none of the cultural hang-ups about public relationships. If anything, they see your romance as proof of your humanity, your ability to value things beyond pure profit. Kieran was staring at Victoria like he was seeing her for the first time. Why are you helping us? Because despite our history, I actually want you to be happy. And because— Victoria's gaze shifted to Rosalie with something that might have been respect. I was wrong about her. Last night proved that Rosalie isn't just your pretty accessory. She's a genuine asset. The word asset made Rosalie flinch slightly, but Victoria continued before she could object. Think about it. You're not just a tech mogul anymore, Kieran. You're part of a power couple. Rosalie's academic credentials, her expertise in art and culture, her obvious intelligence, that opens doors that pure wealth can't access. Cultural institutions, academic partnerships, historical foundations. There's a whole world of influence that values intellectual achievement, as much as financial success. Rosalie felt like she was watching her life being dissected and reassembled according to someone else's vision. I'm not a business strategy, she said quietly. Of course not, Victoria agreed smoothly. You're a woman who happens to bring unique value to a partnership that's already based on genuine love. That's the best possible combination. Marcus was already pulling up files on his computer. 18 billion, he muttered. The European markets, cultural partnerships, academic connections. He looked up at Kieran with something approaching awe. This could be bigger than Yamamoto ever was. The silence stretched between them, filled with the sounds of the city. Car horns, sirens, the distant laughter of children playing. Finally, Kieran pulled out his phone. "Marcus," he said when the call connected. "Set up a meeting with Victoria. We need to discuss the European offers." Rosalie's heart sank. She'd laid out her ultimatum, and he was choosing the money. Of course he was. Men like Kieran Sterling didn't build empires by walking away from $18 billion for romantic ideals. "Tell her we're declining," Kieran continued, his eyes never leaving Rosalie's face. "All of them. Sterling Industries will find other partnerships, ones that don't require my personal life as part of the package." The relief that flooded through Rosalie was so intense she had to lean against the car for support. "Yes, I'm sure," Kieran said into the phone, presumably answering Marcus's shocked protests. "Set up the meeting for tomorrow morning. We'll explain our decision then." He ended the call and pocketed the phone, stepping close enough to frame her face with his hands. $18 billion, he said softly. "Gone. Do you have any idea what you just cost me?" "I'm sorry, nothing," he interrupted, his thumbs tracing her cheekbones. "You just cost me nothing that matters. Because you're right. The moment we start performing our love instead of living it, we lose everything that makes it worth having." Rosalie threw her arms around his neck, relief and love and gratitude overwhelming her completely. "I love you," she whispered against his throat. "Not your money, not your empire, not your business opportunities. Just you." "Just me is a pretty good deal," Kieran murmured, holding her tight. "Though I have to warn you, Marcus is going to need some very strong scotch after this conversation." As they drove back toward the penthouse, Rosalie felt something settle in her chest that she hadn't even realized was unsettled. They still had challenges ahead. The media attention wouldn't disappear, and there would be other business decisions complicated by their relationship. But now she knew something crucial. When forced to choose between love and money, Kieran Sterling chose love, and that made everything else feel manageable. The woman who loved old books was still there, still real, still valued. Everything else was just details. Chapter 13. Ever After. 3 months later, Rosalie stood in the private restoration room of the Sterling collection, carefully applying gold leaf to a damaged initial in a 13th century psalter. The work required absolute concentration, steady hands, and infinite patience. Exactly the kind of meticulous craftsmanship that had drawn her to manuscript preservation in the first place. "How's our patient?" Kieran asked from the doorway, his voice soft so as not to startle her during the delicate procedure. "Responding beautifully to treatment," she replied, not looking up from her work. "This damage looked extensive, but it's mostly surface level. The original artist's work is still intact underneath." Kieran moved closer, watching as she worked with the same fascination he'd shown during their first meeting. "Like us," he said quietly. "Like us," she agreed, finally looking up to meet his eyes. "All the external pressure, all the complications, they never touched what was real underneath." It had been 3 months since Kieran turned down Victoria's European deals, and Sterling Industries hadn't just survived, it had thrived. Without the pressure to package their relationship for public consumption, they'd found their rhythm as both a couple and as business partners. Rosalie's expertise had indeed opened doors, but on her terms, in ways that felt authentic rather than performative. The Tokyo deal had eventually been renegotiated on Sterling's terms, with Yamamoto quietly returning to the table when they realized Kieran's distraction had actually enhanced his business acumen rather than diminished it. 3 other major partnerships had followed, each one drawn by Sterling Industries' reputation for innovation and integrity rather than tabloid headlines. "Speaking of external complications," Kieran said, pulling an envelope from his jacket pocket. "This arrived this morning." Rosalie set down her brush and took the envelope, recognizing the heavy cream stationery and elegant script immediately. "The Met? Dr. Elizabeth Crawford, Director of Medieval Art. She wants to discuss a potential collaboration between the Sterling Collection and the museum's upcoming exhibition on illuminated manuscripts." Rosalie's hands trembled slightly as she opened the letter. Dr. Crawford was a legend in their field, The kind of scholar Rosalie had always dreamed of working with, but never imagined she'd actually meet. "She wants me to co-curate," Rosalie breathed, scanning the formal invitation. The exhibition would feature pieces from both the Met's collection and ours. It would be the opportunity of a lifetime. "Then you'll do it." "Kieran, this would mean months of work. Constant collaboration with the Met's team, public lectures, scholarly publications." She looked up at him, seeing nothing but pride and encouragement in his expression. "It would make me very visible in academic circles." "Good. It's time the world recognized what I've known from the beginning, that you're brilliant, passionate, and deserving of every accolade they can offer." Before she could respond, her phone chimed with a text from Zoe, her former roommate. "Turn on Channel 7 News, now." Kieran was already reaching for the remote, switching on the wall-mounted television. The afternoon news was running a story about New York's power couples, and there they were, a photo from last week's museum fundraiser. Rosalie in a midnight blue gown, and Kieran in his perfectly tailored tuxedo. "Sterling and Chen have become something of a fairy tale in New York society," the reporter was saying. "The tech billionaire and the medieval scholar represent a new kind of power couple, one built on intellectual partnership as much as romantic connection. Their engagement has been hailed as proof that love and ambition can coexist in the modern world." Rosalie watched herself on television, remembering the woman who used to panic at the thought of using the wrong fork at dinner. That woman seemed like a stranger now. "Any regrets?" Kieran asked, muting the television. "About the publicity? About becoming a public figure?" Rosalie considered the question seriously. "Sometimes I miss the anonymity, but I don't miss the fear." "Fear of what?" "Of not being enough. Of not belonging in your world. Of losing myself and trying to become someone I thought you needed." She turned in his arms, her hand smoothing the lapels of his jacket. "I know now that the woman you fell in love with, the one who got excited about manuscript restoration and argued with your board of directors, she was always enough." Kieran's smile was radiant. "More than enough. Perfect, actually. Even when I'm covered in gold leaf and completely absorbed in my work, especially then." He leaned down to kiss her, careful not to disturb her restoration setup. "Have I mentioned lately that I love watching you work? Only every day." "Good. Because I plan to keep doing it for the next 60 years or so." The casual mention of their future made Rosalie's heart skip. They'd been officially engaged for 3 months, but the wedding planning had taken a back seat to more pressing concerns, like learning to navigate their new life together, establishing Rosalie's independent career, and proving to the world that their relationship was built on more than just headlines. "Speaking of the next 60 years, Kieran said, reaching into his other pocket, "I have something for you." "It's not my birthday," Rosalie protested. But she was already smiling in anticipation. "It's better than a birthday." He handed her a small wrapped package. "It's a Tuesday." Inside was a leather-bound journal, its pages blank and waiting. The cover was embossed with a simple inscription: "For all the stories yet to be written, K." "It's beautiful," Rosalie said, running her fingers over the supple leather. "But I'm not much of a writer." "You're living a story worth recording," Kieran said softly. "Someday, when we're old and gray and surrounded by grandchildren who think we're impossibly romantic, you'll want to remember how it all began." How what all began. This, us, the moment a shy librarian walked into a billionaire's office and changed everything with 4 simple words. "I've never been kissed," Rosalie quoted, remembering that first day with Crystal. Clarity. The 4 words that made me forget every rule I'd ever made about love and business and keeping my heart safe. Kieran's hands framed her face with the same reverence he'd shown that very first time. The 4 words that led to everything we have now. Rosalie looked around the restoration room, her restoration room, in their collection, in the life they'd built together. The medieval manuscripts glowed softly under the specialized lighting, centuries-old stories preserved for future generations to discover and treasure. "I love you," she said, the words as natural as breathing now. "Not your money, not your empire, not the doors you can open. Just you. The man who carries me to bed every night and brings me coffee every morning and watches me work like I'm creating miracles instead of just fixing old books. As he kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promise, Rosalie thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. From terrified job applicant to confident fiancé, from anonymous librarian to respected curator, from a woman who'd never been kissed to one who was deeply, passionately, completely loved. The manuscripts around them had survived wars, plagues, the rise and fall of empires. They'd endured because someone, somewhere, had believed their stories were worth preserving. Now she and Kieran were writing their own story, one that would hopefully endure just as long. A story about two people who found each other against impossible odds and chose love over everything else the world had to offer. "Mrs. Sterling," Kieran murmured against her lips. "I'm not Mrs. Sterling yet," she laughed. "Details," he said, his smile wicked. "Besides, I've been thinking about the wedding." "Have you now?" "Small ceremony. Close friends and family only. Maybe here. Surrounded by the manuscripts that brought us together." His eyes grew serious. "I want to marry you, Rosalie. Not the public figure, not the academic success story, not the perfect billionaire's wife. Just you." "Just me," she repeated, remembering Harold's words from the park. "I think I can manage that." "Good. Because just you is all I've ever wanted." As the afternoon sun streamed through the windows, casting golden light across centuries-old artwork, and the couple planning their future among them, Rosalie opened her new journal and wrote the first entry. "Today, a man who forgot all his rules for love reminded me that the best stories are the ones we write ourselves. This is ours." Below that, she added 4 words that had started it all. "I've never been kissed." But now she had been. Thoroughly, passionately, completely kissed by a man who loved her exactly as she was. And she planned to spend the rest of her life kissing him back. After all, the best love stories never really end. They just begin again, every day, with two people choosing each other over and over until "I love you" becomes as natural and essential as breathing. In a room full of medieval love songs and illuminated poetry, surrounded by stories that had survived centuries, Kieran Sterling and Rosalie Chen wrote their own happily ever after, and it was perfect.